Okay, here we go. In 3 minutes. I look forward to enjoying that. Welcome everybody. Let's get set up for our episode. Thank you for joining me if you are live at the moment. And we are here today, we're gathered here today for episode number 98. And this bad boy here, this is going to be our object of affection today. Let me just check in with my live viewers. Yes, I can see you all there. Fantastic. Welcome, welcome, welcome. There are a good 100 of you right off the bat. Welcome to episode 98, my goodness. This episode was meant to be a bike ride through Montmartre, but now we're in lockdown number 2, because we like doing that here apparently, so I can't really leave, so I thought we'd go back to the home editions, and that's where I am right now, in my home. So this right here is a book that they were cleaning out the house of Charlotte's grandfather, and they found this, and they always think of me when they find historical items. It's a bit of a collector's item from 1982, and I'll cut the glare for you here. It's called The History of France Through Its Newspapers of the olden days, past times. And then here there are different periods that the books are dedicated to, and this one is La Belle Époque, and you can see the dates there. So it's going to bring us through the very end of the 19th century all the way up to, of course, World War I. That will be the end of our story, essentially. There's the author's name there. I will explain who that guy is if you don't recognize him. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. And then here is a little preview. This is one of the pages inside the very first Tour de France. So, really exciting stuff. Let me just get myself situated here. Check the timer on the T. We still got a good minute to go. And let's check in with everybody live here. Thank you for joining me, everybody. You can see Christina. They're asking me to turn the music down. Okay, the music is down. And that should be better. Thank you, David Dubois. I appreciate that. And so I just turned the music down, and you can let me know if it still needs to come down a little bit. Thanks, David. Appreciate that. Okay, so let's get started here. I've got a lot of stuff to show you here. Look at this. Beautiful. We are going to start with, so remember, this is, here we're in 1898. And I want to come, don't worry, I'm going to zoom in for you here as well. I thought this was so fantastic. They're talking about basketball, this new invention in the US. And hopefully remember, you can turn your video to 1080p resolution if your connection can handle it. My tea is ready, so I'm just going to take care of that real quick. Should probably do that on camera for you. Zoom out a little bit so you can see the tea here. Ta-da. I'm going to do it over the book, don't worry. Now, even though this is Earl Grey, I'm going to do something a little bit ghastly. Some of you purists might not be into it, but I'm going to put a little bit of milk. Because it is creamy Earl Grey. I don't know if you noticed that. Thank you, Kristen Parker, for that super chat. So I'm going to give this a little sip here. Bob said, add milk. I did, Bob. Don't worry about that, buddy. So let's go back into the Zoom here. I assume the music is okay for y'all? Certainly don't want it to detract. It's just to set the mood, really. Oh, Lori Dean says she always puts cream in her Earl Grey. Yeah, I mean, we don't have to be purists here, and I just put milk and cream in all of my drinks. So let's just jump into this. I've got a lot of stuff to show you here. Laura's saying she can't hear the music. Okay, so the music's either... All right, there we go. Maybe that'll be good. I'll figure out this music thing one day or another. So here, I don't know if you can make this out. I'm going to translate it a little bit for you here. It says, remember, this is a Parisian newspaper. The Americans aren't content to practice only the games handed down to them from the English. They're inventing new ones. The latest calls itself basketball, literally the ball in the basket. So here it says, basketball is barely 2 years old. Imagine that. So this is 1898, and the game of basketball is only 2 years old. I thought that was pretty fun. And I want to read you this section here. It says, one day a professor, it's talking about the origins of basketball. I assume this is historically accurate, although I haven't fact-checked it against Wikipedia or some other resource. But it says, one day a professor wanting the young people to come frequent the gymnasium more often had the idea to organize a soccer match. But playing soccer in a gymnasium was a little bit tough, so he invented a new version of the game that sort of followed the same idea as soccer, but instead, of course, you'd have to throw a ball into a panier, into a basket that was hung on the wall. I think that was pretty great. And of course, it shows all of these moves here, like you can see here. It's called un dribbling in French, un dribbling. And then here too, it says, interestingly, teams were composed of 6 players. And if I'll zoom in even a little bit more for you here on the diagram. If you look carefully, there are 6 players on the left and 6 players on the right. So obviously at some point that changed to 5, and I find it curious that the game was different in that respect. Let's check in with my live audience here. I got some super chats, I appreciate that. Thank you to Ariane Smith and Kristen Parker, beautiful. Thanks everybody, that really helps. Helping to support the cause. And David Dubois, again, I already gave you a shout out, David, but you deserve another one. So the tea's delicious. Let me take another sip of that, keep the old whistle wet. Corinne says perfect volume for the music. Well, there we go. The only reason the volume thing is tricky for me is because I can't actually hear it myself, so I'm going a little bit blind. Here we are. Oh, by the way, if you notice my hands are a little beat up, it's because I've been working out at home. I've been trying to get fit during this lockdown quarantine period. Actually, for a long time I have been, and that's why my hands are a little beat up. So it's for a good cause. All right, I gotta speed things up a little bit because I've got a lot to show you here. Next, why don't we make our way to, I've got things, as you can see, the little tabs here. There was a contest of automobiles. And I think this is so charming. So again, this is Belle Époque. Here we're around 1899. And let's here. What happened was in Paris, they had a contest of all of these automobiles. And I was thinking when I was looking at this, of course, the word automobile, we take it for granted, but it meant something was automatically mobile, that it could move itself, which is, you know, Captain Obvious. But an article like this makes me realize, it reminds me again of, you know, what the word is derived from. So what they did, they had a competition in Paris arranged by the Automobile Club of France to test out all these new models. There were 12 competitors, and some were electric, some were gas, some were even steam powered, and they tested them all around town for speed and power and braking and safety and all of those things. So very charming, and throws us right into the Belle Époque period. June Parham says, so cool. Oh, I'm glad you think so, June. Let me zoom out a little bit for you. And be definitely utilizing the zoom mode today. Here too, this is of note. They mention that women, because we're kind of getting in the area of the suffragettes and women's rights and whatnot, and so that is going to be one of the themes that runs through these newspapers. And of course, these are all clippings that come from different newspapers chronologically. And it says right here that women already have the right to be vendors. They're allowed to be professors. They can sell medicine. They can even give medical care to the sick. And then, of course, artistic careers. So they've been able to do all of that for a while. But it says here later, it says, one day, a few of them got the idea to study law. Imagine that novel idea. And so they wanted to particularly fight for the rights of la veuve, which means widows, and l'orphelin, of course, orphans. So there was a little bit of resistance, it says, but then they eventually voted that women would have the right to practice law. And I want you to remember that I'm pointing it out because a future image that we'll see a couple of years later will show us that, in fact, women would eventually gain that right and take advantage of it. This is fun. Look at this. This is the year, or about 1899 again, and this is announcing a brand new sculpture installed in Paris. This is at Place de la Nation. And I'll go a little bit closer. This is by a gentleman called Dalou. And it's a very faithful drawing. I don't know if it was drawn from a photograph, but I'll show you what I mean, because we're not just going to use the book. I did arrange some images as well. And so on the left, we have the exact image from our book, and on the right, a picture that I took a little while ago, Place de la Nation. And I'll just give you a moment to compare. Obviously, as I said, a very faithful drawing and a beautiful statue. Let me check in with my live audience here. Excellent. Thanks, everybody. It's so cool to have you here. So if you're just joining, we are going through old newspapers of the Belle Époque, this new acquired book that I got from the 80s. And it's got that old book smell. I love it to death. So by the way, if you're interested, this statue here by Dalou, and I'll mention something interesting about this sculptor in a moment. He did a lot of stuff throughout Paris. But what you're looking at is a woman on top who represents the French Republic, which is fairly common. She's standing on top of a globe, which in turn is on a chariot. And in front of the chariot, if you can make it out about in the middle of that image, is the Genie of Liberty, which also happens to be the same allegory, the same symbolic character that is on top of the Bastille column, that large green column of La Bastille. So that's the Genie of Liberty. And then on the left, you have a figure representing travail, or work. On the right-hand side is a woman representing justice. And then you've got some big, hefty lions at the front pulling the chariot forward. Now, the thing about Dalou, the sculptor who is very renowned and very successful, and again, is all over Paris. If you're familiar with the very peculiar tomb in Père Lachaise, where there's a particular bulge, shall we say, that some people rub for various reasons. Those of you who know will know, and those who don't know, you'll have no idea what I'm talking about, but I'm just going to leave it vague. His name is Victor Noir, and his tomb in Père Lachaise was sculpted by this same guy, Mr. Dalou. And so, yeah, that's the sculptor of the bulge, infamously at Père Lachaise, is the same guy who did this and several others. So, back to our book. And back to my tea, actually. Let me see what y'all have to say about that in the comments. So yeah, if you are watching live, thank you so much for joining. And I will remind you that you'll see that little $ in the live chat, and that is a great way to help support the cause and send an instant donation, particularly during lockdown number 2. Every euro is much appreciated, every dollar, every peso. Sometimes I get pesos. David Dubois says he knows what I'm talking about at Père Lachaise. Here we got advertisements as well, and I found this. So we've got patin bicyclette, essentially old style rollerblades, roller skates. So you had to be, now these gents are looking pretty well dressed, aren't they? Pretty dapper, and you would have to be, because 80 francs here. I found a converter. The conversions are always fairly accurate if you find a reputable website, and so the conversion of 80 francs in today's money, counting for inflation as well, would run you about 300 euros. And obviously in US dollars, it would be even more. So that's probably, 300 euros equivalent, you gotta really be an avid outdoorsman, so to speak. But what you really gotta have is one of these hats and one of these canes, because otherwise you probably don't have the means to get a hold of those 300 euro roller skates. But that's probably why it says here that you can buy them, but they're also en location, which means for rent. If you are learning French, be careful of that word location. It's a faux ami, it's a false friend. It doesn't mean location as in a geographical area. Location means rental. So that's probably why they were rented, because of that price. 300 euros, my goodness. Okay, this is fun here. We're getting into the World's Fair. Now, I have to admit, I was a little bit sad that this book didn't have a lot of pages and a lot of articles about the Expo of 1900, because it was a doozy. It was a beautiful, beautiful World's Fair. And all I've got is this one page. But from this page, we can find some interesting little tidbits. First of all, this right here, if you can see at the bottom, it's called the Russia Pavilion. And that was one of the temporary structures in Paris. One of dozens and dozens. And every time I talk about these old world expos, it gets me a little bit sad because I wish they had in some way managed to save these structures. But if we go over here, this is fun. So at first I couldn't make out what it was, but it's advertising restaurants of the expo. And I want you to note the names of these three restaurants: Auberge des Nations, Restaurant du Pré au Clair, and Cabaret des Halles. Because I managed to find an image. I went searching for an image of those. And this is one image that I found. This drawing of a couple of those restaurants. You can actually see those same three names of the restaurants at the top of the image there. And then on the bottom it says Old Paris 1900. I mean, can you imagine this expo must have been just stupendous. Oh, my heart aches that if I could go back in time, I'd probably go to the opening of the World Expo of 1900. Now, if we zoom in even more, do you notice right in the center of your screen here, we'll try to get it in focus, it says a déjeuner was 6 francs and a dîner, a dinner, was 8 francs. So 6 for lunch and 8 for dinner in that particular restaurant. And just for fun, I did the conversion again. So that means lunch here would run you, in today's money, about 23 euros, and dinner would be 32 euros or so. So they were making good money here. And here are the, got some other restaurants, and this tells you that it's at Trocadero next to the Tour Eiffel. One last thing I wanted to point out is, I might have to zoom in quite a bit. Those are, on the right-hand side, are the attendance numbers for each month. So it opened in mid-April and ran through November. And if you look, those numbers started to go up: 6 million, 6 million, 7 million, 9 million in September. And then if you can make it out, that very last total on the bottom right says 48 million people attended this. Totally, 48 million. To give you an idea, to wrap your head around that, the current population of Spain as an entire nation isn't too much more than that. So imagine this World's Fair happens, and over the course of it, of the duration of its opening, you have essentially, imagine the whole country of Spain just flooding into France over the course of 5 or 6 months. That gives you an idea of how immense and how successful this World's Fair was. It's pretty exciting stuff. Jennifer Robinson again, thanks Jennifer for joining. She says, yeah, it's so sad the buildings were destroyed. Thanks Lois, she's given some extra info on the French franc. Okay, onward, that's a little bit of the World's Fair. Okay, so do you see what's going on here? I'll show you the image first. And then the first female lawyer. So that's what I was setting up before. I'll give you a full view if you're interested in it. Le Petit Journal was a very, very common publication. And this is December of 1900. So this is 2 years after that article that said women can have the right to study law and become lawyers. So there we go. Her name was Madame Petit, interestingly. Madame Petit, just doing her thing, the very first female lawyer in the year 1900. So it kind of ties a little bow on that previous article. Speaking of women, this is fun. So we're starting to get actual photos now at this point. You'll notice the difference. And grab my pointer. So this is all about tennis. And this is showing how a proper, respectable French lady would practice her tennis moves. Because, nothing says comfort on a hot summer day like doing cardio in a full dress with long sleeves and a hat. So let us zoom in. So one funny thing that it mentions right here, and by the way, I've made these little marks in pencil, so for you book lovers and purists out there, I'll be erasing these afterward. It breaks my wife's heart because she's such a book lover. She doesn't even like me writing in pencil. But so it says, we've tried to show you via photography, which probably was a pretty fancy way to show it at the turn of the century. Thanks to one of our strongest and most elegant Joyous Parisians. Can you make that out in the center? So here's one of their strongest and most elegant and joyous Parisians. Look at her. She's got the serve move. And I wonder if they picked a dancer, because look, she's practicing the high swing, and that's a dancer, right? That's a dancer's body right there, if I do say so myself. Forehand action, backhand. Oh, charging the net, because sometimes a lady's got to get aggressive. Have you noticed yet the beautiful shape, the elegant shape of these? Each one is slightly different, obviously hand drawn, and there's actually quite an Art Nouveau flair to them. Remember, we are in the Belle Époque. This is turn of the century. We're right smack dab in the Art Nouveau aesthetic. And this one too, with these little pointy things. That's beautiful, subtle Art Nouveau. So you ladies can let me know in the comments if you, I want to know what you think about these images and this idea of going out there and sweating in front of everybody on a tennis court in an outfit like this. I thought that was pretty charming. So that's French tennis in 1800. If you don't mind, I'm going to pour another cup of tea here. By the way, I started this episode at 10 p.m. my time, so this is caffeinated tea, and I hope you appreciate the fact that I will not be able to sleep anytime soon. I'll go extra milk for those of you who are fans. We're gonna go nice and light. All right, cheers. And I promise not to spill it on the tennis girl. Let me check in with my wonderful live viewers. Peggy says, I don't know how she could play and run in a long dress. Sounds like a recipe for disaster. And if you are one of these sort of proper self-conscious women, what happens the first time you fall down? You're gonna mess up that dress. It's gonna be grass stained, it's gonna be dirty. And then what do? You just keep playing and not looking your best? I don't know. I'm not buying it. Well, I have to buy it because it's in the book, it's in the newspaper. So I guess there's some grain of truth. Oh, and Sharon says her slippers no support at all. I know, those dogs would be barking after this match. Okay, so moving on to another sport. Here we're going to go to what I mentioned with the first Tour de France. And I got so excited when I came across this page because I thought, well, maybe this was a Tour de France, but didn't know it was the first one. So let me zoom in so you can see the map. You can see it was substantial. And there's a fun little anecdote that goes along with the first Tour de France. Do you see the name of this publication called Loto? Well, at this time, this is 1903, and Loto, the publication, was doing just abysmal sales. They weren't making money at all. They're worried about bankruptcy and whatnot, and they got everybody together, an emergency staff meeting, and they said to everybody, we need an idea to boost sales of our publication, and otherwise we're going to go under. So they went around the meeting and everybody gave their ideas about what they could do, and the very last guy to give an idea was the most junior of all of the team. He was just 26 years old, and he said, you know what, I've got a crazy idea, but I'm thinking about what if we organized a large scale bike race? Because before this they would do bike races all the time in France, but they were inside in what they would call velodrome. And they would do that and they go round and around for hours or whatever. And he said, why don't we take that idea and just spread it out across France? And at first his other team members said, you know what, that sounds kind of crazy, I'm not sure, but they gave it a shot. And it became the first Tour de France. And of course, an immense success for everybody involved, but particularly for this publication, Loto. It really turned around their sales figures. So there were 60 competitors originally in the first one. They have a list over here, by the way. And to give you an idea, in just this year's Tour de France, there were 176 compared to 60. And then look at these three guys here. Now the winner of the first Tour de France actually ended up being this gentleman here, Maurice Garin. And I know it's a little bit hard to imagine what he looked like in real life, but that's why I got a hold of this photo. So he's the guy in the shorts, Maurice Garin, the first winner of the first Tour de France. And he's looking quite happy. And he should look happy because apparently the grand prize, if you won this thing, you would win the equivalent of about six times what the average worker would make in a year. So yeah, there he is in his shorts, looking very dapper, and I assume that's the bike that he won it on. So there you go, for you bike fans and you Tour de France fans, we've got the very first race. Heather says those thighs. Settle down, Heather, go take a cold shower. Oh, this is fun too. Again with a sports theme. Let me zoom in actually properly for you. So, table tennis, but not for your average folks. Look at this. This is some elite, noble table tennis being played. And I get a kick out of it because look at the table. It looks all polished and shiny. Like that's a high-end table. And they're like, yeah, let's just strap a table tennis net to it. And the text here is funny. It says, table tennis, having enjoyed an immense success this last winter in England and the US, America, it's without a doubt the best game that exists. So there you go. And then it says it can be played on a table of ordinary grandeur. And you can install it very easily. So I don't know if that's a table of ordinary grandeur, but I think it's pretty charming. Turn of the century ping pong, essentially, was extremely fashionable. And again, it would cost you a pretty penny because you can see there are two different sets that you can purchase. And the deluxe set, so to speak, 10 francs 50, would run you about 41 euros or $47. Oops. All right. Next up, my next little dog ear. Just for fun, look at this ad. Well, first of all, I mean, that car is beautiful, but I wanted to show you this ad. Dun, 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 dun. I'm so stupid. You know what that was? I just tried to zoom. I was trying to zoom for you guys. How bad is that? Let me do it here. That's going to work better. Oh, maybe I need more caffeine. So how beautiful is that? Oh, man. High fashion. And it was high fashion because I don't even think you'll be able to read this, but can you see the address of the tailor? It's 12 Rue Aubert. Those of you who know Paris fairly well will know that Rue Aubert is right next to the Opera House, the Opera Garnier. So let me tell you, you would pay a pretty penny for this custom-made tailored dress because it wasn't just off the rack, I can tell you. And any tailor that was right next to the opera was going to charge you a pretty penny. In fact, I did the conversion, actually. It was about 380 euros. 380 euros, and in dollars, we're talking about 440 in US dollars. As far as Australian dollars, forget about it. Next one. This is an article about American skyscrapers. So, les gratte-ciel des États-Unis. I always thought it was charming that the French word for skyscraper means essentially the same thing, like scraping or rather scratching the sky. Sky scratchers. What is charming about this? First of all, the article mentioned something that I didn't quite realize, because you can learn a lot just about history in general, not just French culture, through these newspaper articles. They just mentioned in passing that the very early skyscrapers of New York and Chicago and whatnot were actually built obviously because there wasn't a lot of space, but in fact, these large companies wanted all of their office workers, all of their employees under one roof so they could hold meetings and functions and whatnot without being spread across multiple blocks of the city. So if you needed to call a staff meeting, or all the accountants or the finance team had to get together, or HR, whatever, they were all here under one roof and they could meet very easily. So that was something that maybe is obvious to some of you, but to me, it was sort of a revelation of like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It wasn't just about there wasn't enough space to build. It was about keeping everybody in an entire company under one roof. And for that reason, as far as I know, a lot of the skyscrapers early on were not residential. They were mostly for these larger corporations and businesses. Now, what's cute here, let's zoom in. Remember, these are early. This is the year, do we have a year here? This is early 1900s. And look at this one. So they're showing off these grand, tall buildings. This one says 15 floors, which was impressive. But what about 18 floors? Wow. And then this one, the Big Daddy, 27 étages, 27 floors. And the reason I find that charming is because this was long before the 1930s when the Chrysler Building, for example, would be built. And the Chrysler Building had 77 floors. Remember, this one here that they're kind of bragging about, 27. But then the Chrysler comes along and has 77, and then soon after the Empire State Building would have 102 floors. So almost like 4 times the height of that one. I thought that was interesting. Hopefully some of you did too. Let me check in with we're going to talk about Madame Curie in a minute. I just want to check in with everybody live. Thanks everybody for hanging out. Daniel Molden saw an ad for wine, of course. I can always count on the Freets to scope out the wine advertising. Excellent. So, this is 1906, and a cute little article about Madame Curie, Marie Curie. She lived in Paris with her husband, Pierre, and he died of a very terrible, in an accident. He was on the Rue Dauphine, not far from the Pont Neuf, and tripped and fell. It was a rainy day, he wasn't paying attention, and just bad timing, a carriage came at the exact moment and ran over him and he was dead. So when her husband died, what this is talking about just after is saying that the Faculty of Sciences got together and they held a meeting and they decided to, one, maintain the professor's post that her husband had. They're not gonna dissolve his position, and then on top of that, they're gonna give the husband's position to Marie Curie. And so this is essentially her becoming the first female professor at the Sorbonne, which she, of course, is famous for. So this is where it all started here in 1906. By the end of this year, of 1906, she would become the first female professor. And I've got an image here of her. It's not a great image. In fact, I think they caught her with her eyes closed, but back then you didn't necessarily snap a bunch of pictures. You kind of just lived with whatever you could get. But this is her presumably in the Sorbonne and giving one of her famous lectures, and you can see everybody's just like hanging on every word. Very impressive stuff. Not only the first female professor at this university, but first woman to win a Nobel Prize. She was the first woman to ever win 2. And in fact, she's the only woman to have won 2, and she's a part of a very, very esteemed group of only 4 people that have won 2 Nobel Prizes. So Marie Curie, definitely the man, so to speak. There is one photo I forgot to show you. We were talking about skyscrapers. Would you like to see the very first skyscraper in Paris? It's right here. And it was, it's on the Rue de Croulebarbe, and it's in the 13th arrondissement. And I haven't counted how many floors this is, but it historically is considered the first skyscraper that Paris ever got. I don't have the date. I should have grabbed the date for you. Thank you so much, Grant, for that super chat. I appreciate that. So you'll find this in the 13th arrondissement. Back to Marie Curie and back to our next item. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. This is some. Let's check this out. The Wright brothers making moves in the field of aviation. So this is Orville Wright here featured. And if we zoom in here, one thing caught my eye in this article. And what it says is, well, first of all, it says they were working for years and years and years, and then finally in 1908, when the powers that be in the French government allowed the Wright brothers to obtain French patents, this word brevet, then they were able to really take off, no pun intended, and really develop their capabilities of flight. So I thought that was interesting that in this French article, they managed to mention that while the Americans were doing all right, it wasn't until they got a hold of some of the French patents that they were able to really make progress. So I thought that was pretty cute. And then on the next page, because really we're right in the middle of people are airplane crazy. Mr. Wright is flying better and better. And right here it says 10 minutes in the air. So that must have been impressive to spend 10 minutes before landing. And then here actually they did like time trials of what the Wright brothers were doing. But this is interesting. It says, will man glide like a bird? Right? So they pose the question, will man glide like a bird? And then here, no, says the archdeacon. And then si, yes, 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 says Monsieur Depré or Després. So the archdeacon was not buying it. He's like, no, this is not going to work. But then this guy was definitely more of an optimist. I don't know who he was, but I like him. Checking with my peeps here. Heather Jackson says she counted 22 or 23 floors of the skyscraper. Excellent. Alpha says, at that time it was so remarkable to have Marie win a Nobel and be a professor. Yeah, absolutely, Alpha. Appreciate that comment. Yeah, Sharon reminds me that she is in the she's in the Panthéon. I assume that's what you're talking about, Sharon, because I know Madame Curie is in the Panthéon. Here, oh, this is just fun. Zoom in here. This is even back then, gentlemen were dyeing their beards. Let me zoom in better. And what makes me laugh about this is for hair dye. This is just a drawing, so how easy is it to just fake this? And you just draw a guy with white hair on one side, and then you just color it in with your pen on the other side. I don't know, something about that made me chuckle. I suppose nowadays you can doctor a photo just as easily, but even well over a century ago, men were still concerned about looking older. All right. Here's another sign of the times in an interesting way. Talking about obesity. You wouldn't think at the turn of the century that would even be on their radar. I was surprised to see that it was. So this is for every 1,000 inhabitants. So in France, 141 out of 1,000 people, and then comparing it, of course, to Japan. And the article goes on to say, we're kind of lagging behind in France. We need to get a hold of this situation. I went ahead and, for reference, looked at the current obesity levels in both of these countries. And in France, this number out of 1,000 people has gone from 141 to 240. So I don't know, is that a lot in 120 years, or is that not a lot? So from 140 to 240. I hope I said that correctly at the beginning. So from 140 to 240. But then in Japan, what has happened in Japan? Well, they went from 5, and nowadays They are right around 30, from 5 to 30. So anyway, hopefully that's interesting to somebody out there. I can only hope that our interests align enough for you to enjoy these tidbits. And there are enough of you here live that I'm inclined to believe that we are on the same page. No pun intended. Look at this one. This is so fun. Again, I never knew about this until this book came. France adopts the London time. And it says we're going to set our clocks back, our watches rather. We're going to set back our watches 9 minutes and 21 seconds. And I had to look into what this was all about. I did know that, the prime meridian that we use that runs through England today to determine the longitude of the Earth and the time zones, that runs through England. Many of you may know that. But there was also a competing meridian that ran through Paris. And depending on which map you were making or which time zone you were figuring out, you could choose whether you wanted to use the Parisian meridian or the English meridian, for example. And so what we've got here is a moment in the early 1900s where France is deciding to adopt London time. And they, apparently before that, France was exactly 9 minutes and 21 seconds ahead. As far as the ghost of the Parisian meridian, if you've seen any of these medallions embedded in Paris in the pavement, they follow north and south. They sort of ghostly trace of that old Parisian meridian that was once used but is completely gone now and was essentially abandoned for the London time, or I should say the English meridian. Used to be in Greenwich, but now, as I understand it, they moved it slightly. So keep an eye out for those medallions if you're not familiar with them. But yeah, 9 minutes and 21 seconds that we had to set our clocks back. I say we, but obviously I wasn't part of that. Next. You'll recognize this brand here. How fun is that? Quaker Oats. And what we've got here too, it's kind of funny what they say. So you can see there's a scale happening here. And we've got the oats here. And this is supposed to represent a cut of meat. Could be a pork chop or some kind of ribeye or something. And then what it says is un bon potageau, sort of like a good bowl of Quaker Oats, is actually more nourishing than a cut of meat. Okay, so that's what they're doing here. I don't know, are these numbers, are they comparing fat maybe? Because it's true that you wouldn't find as much fat, but you'd find a whole hell of a lot of carbs there. That might do you in the long run, but back then they weren't thinking of that. So anyway, Quaker Oats was using that as a marketing angle, that it was much better for you than cut of meat. And then on this page, look what happened. A lot of you know about this. Someone has stolen the Mona Lisa, La Joconde, from the Louvre. When, how, and who? So here's this. Monday morning at 7:30, the famous painting was still at the Louvre, and at 8:30, it had disappeared. The most interesting part of this page, I wish they had more going on here. I mean, these articles aren't particularly interesting to us. I'm sure that the newspapers were just going bonkers when the Mona Lisa was stolen. This is 1911. But then this cartoon actually is fun. And you'll notice it says Corot. And I didn't know this, in fact, so I've been learning so much from this book. What happened is when the Mona Lisa was stolen, shortly after, the Louvre acquired this. And it's by Camille Corot. It's called The Woman with the Pearl. And some of you might be saying, Woman with a Pearl. It's not Pearl Earring. It's not Vermeer's Girl with a Pearl Earring, but it's named very similarly. And apparently, even though Corot was dead by this time, it was believed that he drew inspiration from the Mona Lisa for this picture. And so what's interesting is apparently the Mona Lisa gets stolen and it was gone for a good 2 years. What the Louvre did is they acquired this Corot that reminded everybody of the Mona Lisa. And I'm assuming that to some extent, for the visitors, it served as a replacement. And the proof of that is in this cartoon, because it says acquired by the Louvre. And it says there were up to 150,000 of us coming to see her because she reminds us of our poor Mona Lisa. So how's that for a twist on that story? I did not know that there was a replacement for the Mona Lisa because she had a similar pose. And there you go. And then this happens to be a new novel by Mr. Gaston Leroux. Some of you might recognize that name. He wrote The Phantom of the Opera. And this came after that because it says down here, Le Fantôme de l'Opéra. So he had already written that one. And again with 5 people here. Thank you, Anna Tinsman. I really appreciate that. Amazing. All right, onward. Sorry, move the screen. Didn't mean to do that. Oh, that's Thomas Edison, by the way. He makes some appearances here. And this is an automatic telephone. That was apparently a big deal. Here we've got car ads. And just for fun, if you're wondering about the price, if we do another conversion of this bad boy here. By the way, they had a showroom on the Champs-Élysées, which is very common nowadays for high-end places to have showrooms. Let me turn on, hold on. Oops, turn on this light. I think I wanted to turn that light on from the beginning. Fix that. So anyway, back to there we are. This price right here, 10,050, in euros is about 32K. And in dollars, US dollars, about 37 grand. So it was still, pretty comparable to nowadays, I would say. Here's a fun ad. La Samaritaine. This word stumped me for a while, but étrennes means essentially like the holidays, Christmas and New Year's. It's the gifts that you would give during that time. So this would have been obviously you can see the month of December. This would have been a holiday period sales event. Cute. So we got long coat. We've got a doll for the ladies, or the kids. Toy car, toy train. And then this is funny too. Look, it's called an écharpe cache-nez. So it's a special scarf, and cache-nez would translate into hiding your nose. So maybe it was used, I'm guessing here, this is a complete guess, but maybe you would cover your nose with it when you were cold, right? Looks comfy. How about this place? Are you familiar with this place? It was called the Magic City. And it was in Paris. It was just a couple of blocks east of the Eiffel Tower. Opened in 1911, which this article is from as well, and it was all about the very first impressions of this place. So this was right along the Seine, on the Quai d'Orsay, just east of the Eiffel Tower, as I said. And there were a lot of beautiful images taken, postcards and whatnot, so I want to share a few of those with you. This is the entrance, for example. And you can see it was, interestingly, the title was in English. It was called the Magic City. And this was a large-scale amusement park. And it had rides and roller coasters and games and beautiful restaurants and whatnot. And it went on from 1911 all the way up through the 30s. Got some more images for you here too. So you can see they used the Seine, they utilized the Seine. And then they had this large, like, water chute where you could ride, you know, sort of like, I don't know what the name of that is, but it, you know, where you splash down at the end of the rails. And then here's the entrance of a roller coaster of sorts. Look at that, just stunning. And this place was sitting right next to the Eiffel Tower. Apparently there wasn't anything there ahead of time. It was just sort of an unused bit of land. And then that ride apparently would take you through this, you know, all these various wonders and tunnels and sculptures and pools of water and stuff. And you were just kind of just tool around, I guess. And then they had a stunning restaurant that is long gone. But apparently this restaurant had amazing reviews. And can you imagine, boy, they just don't build restaurants like they used to. So that was the Magic City of Paris. And it was a huge success. And now, as far as I know, there's really no trace of it at all in the city. This is fun. This is an article defending Cubism, because now we're in the time, early 1900s, when Picasso and Braque and whatnot, they're all doing their thing. So that's what this goes on to say. We need to give our young artists room to breathe and the chance to explore and to experiment, because clearly there were people who thought Cubism was kind of a joke, obviously. And this interesting cartoon, this is a girl playing with some cubes, and it says, "A game of cubes." And she says, "You see, Mom, I'm not just playing, I'm making modern painting. I'm doing some modern painting." So that is a not so subtle dig at the cubists that, you know, obviously the detractors would have thought, like, it's kind of ridiculous. You're just kind of playing around and you're calling it an art movement, an artistic movement. So there you go. I thought that was pretty cool. Oh, and look at this. For all of you alcohol drinkers out there, Mercier, it's still going strong. You can still get this champagne, it's still delicious. And so that's what an ad looked like in the early 1900s. She doesn't look very pleased about it. Maybe the guy's pour is subpar. 4.5 million bottles sold annually. So, I've got a little bit more to see. This is a fun ad for a boudoir mirror. To be chic, pour être chic. And then it's essentially a three-way mirror, 3 separate mirrors that allow you to see your backside. And at first I was like, oh, that's a bit of overkill, but it makes complete sense, doesn't it? Because this was still a time where women were dressing so that you would have stuff attached to the back of you. Ribbons and belts and sachets and all sorts of stuff. You can see that's exactly what she's looking at. So it actually would have, unlike nowadays, it would have been very advantageous to see what was behind you if you were trying to tie a bow or... So that, it seems like overkill, but it actually makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? And you can get 12 months credit. So even back then, people were getting screwed by creditors. Some things never change. Ooh, here's something that has changed, luckily. This may surprise you. An opium den in Montmartre. So these 2 pages of the book have a theme of there's a problem with opium and cocaine. Came from the East, came from the Asian countries and made its way over to Europe and America and pretty much all over the globe now. So here we have a particular den in Montmartre. And it actually shows the steps. So you see the number 1 here? So number 1 is, I guess, you set up your paraphernalia and you do whatever you do. And then this is step number 2, you basically pass out. But step number 3, I can't figure out what that is. Looks like some Asian characters, right? So something's going on in that little cabinet, but that's step 3 of your opium experience. So yeah, and some of the articles are actually rather sad because it's talking about how people are overdosing and stuff. So Even the, let's see, this says 1911. So even in 1911, can you imagine? Now, interestingly, these articles are about opium and cocaine, and I've been rewatching a lot of Sherlock Holmes and getting back into those stories. And if any of you are familiar, Sherlock Holmes, as a character, was taking quite a bit of opium and cocaine and whatnot, and he was getting quite high himself in those stories. Ah, here's another great ad. Look at this. Belle poitrine. You want a beautiful chest. So I just get a kick out of it. It's like, you know, you go from this, and of course what's funny is because they had to keep it proper, of course, so you don't see any cleavage or any real contour. They didn't want to get graphic, obviously. So what you have is, this kind of looks normal, but then all they do is clearly the artist is just, you know, he's just fudging it, and then this just looks weird, right? I mean, you'd expect to see a little bit of definition here, and it just looks like she had her rib cage blown up like a balloon. But anyway, I'm sure it was a successful ad. I guess one moral of the story is people were just as vain back then as they are now. Okay, here we go. Look, Titanic. It's Titanic time. It's 1912. Not a lot of articles about the Titanic again, but what is here is quite interesting because let's start right here. Look at this. This says 2,300 human lives saved. Everybody was saved, according to this early article. And what this does, in fact, what the author of the book is telling us right now, is that the very early telegraphs that came into the news outlets actually mistakenly said that everybody was saved from the Titanic. And then obviously the bad news hit a day or two later, and all of these publications had to make corrections and retractions and whatnot. So here, 2,300 people saved. Let's zoom in a little bit here. It says the Virginian came to the aid, came alongside the Titanic, and there was no loss of human lives. So that was another incorrect thing. Here we have a telegram coming into New York in April saying the Titanic sank at 2:20 in the morning, but there are no victims. So of course eventually they realized, oh yeah, there were victims. And this is a more accurate, it says 1,400 people perished. So that's curious. Again, another thing that I learned thanks to this book. That's why this acquisition was such a gold mine. This, in fact, this number is a little bit higher. It ended up being about 1,500, a little over 1,500. But that's curious. I'd be surprised if you knew that, actually, because I certainly didn't. That the initial reports were that everything was fine. Yeah, maybe it sank, but everybody got off. Everybody was saved. Not the case. I mean, this is the Belle Époque. You got to have a phonograph ad, so I just thought that was funny. Not funny, but interesting with the discs. Lisa says, wow, huge faux pas. And Margaret says, pretty significant error. Yes, very significant error. We're getting towards the end of the book here. And what we have is the lead up to 1914, which of course is World War I. What this is, appel à la France, a call to France, is essentially they're changing the number of years that you were required as a young man, an able-bodied man, to join the army. So there was a required service, forced military service. So let's get in a little closer here. So this is 1913. As you can see, they're gearing up to what will become World War I, even though they're doing everything they can to avoid it. And this right says, it says the active army of Germany has 900,000 men, and today France only has 480,000. So they're really showing the disparity of how we need to prep. And so all of this goes on to say that the service of 3 years, applicable to everybody, with no getting out of it, essentially, no exceptions. So there used to be at this point in 1913, there were 2 years of required obligatory military service for all men. And this is them changing it from 2 years to 3 years, essentially preparing themselves for what was coming. And as we make our way to the end of the book, 1914 is the end, we will see obviously things are escalating, and it's more and more on everybody's minds. Next up, 8 bishops banned the tango. This is just basically laying out the fact that there were a bunch of bishops around France that decided the tango was not in line with the morals of the parish, and they banned the tango in all of these different parts of France. There's a mécano, which in the States they call an erector set, and this says that you can get, it's the Eiffel Tower, or at least the top part of it, and you can build this all in metal. It's funny how it says this was built by a young boy, and it measures almost 2 meters, almost 6 feet tall. And in fact, it's all metal, and there's this mechanism with pulleys and little elevators that would go up and down. So the Eiffel Tower had been around for maybe 25 years or so at this point, but it was still clearly an impressive structure, and this would be the ultimate gift to give your kid, I guess, if you had a young boy. Funny how it always mentions like boy, your son, your young man, and blah blah blah. It never mentions women, because of course back then it would be unthinkable that a girl could be interested in engineering and building a tower. Look at this. Liberate the young lady. So this is about corsets. And this was the old style of corset. And you can see, let me zoom in better. You can see she's like, oh, this corset is too restrictive because all my girlfriends are out playing and I had to put down my racket because I can't breathe. And woe is me and all of that. It must have been actually terrible. I'm not making fun of it. So this is an ad saying no longer are we going to crush our innards, but we're going to invent this version of a corset. And in fact, what this text says, it says the principle of this new product, which women are already wearing, this is funny, gives an entire liberty to the vital organs, the heart, the lungs, and the stomach. At the same time, the back and the kidneys are supported, which is a necessary support for the spinal cord and the spine. So interestingly, they were saying that this part was necessary for women because otherwise you would hurt your spine and have bad posture. Interesting justification there. But yeah, that was a new corset apparently, that all of this was open so that you could actually breathe. But it's still tucked in your tummy. And then of course this is a mom doing the right thing, buying one for her little girl. Hopefully you found that interesting. Tara says there was no Rosie the Riveter engineer yet. So we're almost done here. I knew this would be a long episode. Thanks everybody for sticking with it. Here we've got an ad that says, never leave for vacation without bringing along your, and I'm not even going to pronounce that, but that's kind of an unfortunate name for the product. And it is, as you can see, it's a recorder of visuals, it's a recorder of the view. So it's a video camera. And it says for filming yourself, your memories of your voyages and your excursions and whatnot. So can you imagine, look at the size of this damn thing. Of course they send the youngest out there. Sally, go set up that enormous box, that enormous camera that we lugged all the way here on vacation, and that enormous heavy tripod. Go set that up and film us while we're here on vacation. I wonder how many families would have actually bothered to do that, because this thing is, I mean, that's substantial. Funny that compared to how we do things nowadays. And these brothers Pathé, that's a big name in French cinema. And so, yeah, there you go. Again, unfortunate naming. This, if you're interested, was a wireless receiver for telegraphs that were coming from the Eiffel Tower right here. The latest news of the Eiffel Tower. What kind of news could you receive? Because, you know, the Eiffel Tower had an antenna on the top and it would send telegraph messages all throughout the day. So signals like the horaire, or the time of day. You can get meteorological bulletins of the weather. You can get news. You could get cours de la bourse, so you could get stock exchange numbers. The wireless telegraph was getting really big at this time of in history. Here we go, folks. This is World War I. We're getting to the end. Austria declares war on Serbia, which I'm no war historian, but as I understand it, is essentially the beginning of World War I. Once Austria declared their intentions against Serbia, kind of kicked off the whole thing. And a lot of these articles here are about people trying to mediate and find a solution and diplomacy and whatnot to try to keep all of the countries of Europe from going to war. Sadly, that didn't work, because here we can see what the Austrians go one step further and they actually bomb Belgrade. And that definitely started World War I, because then all these other countries had to start getting involved and defending and whatnot. And then this is the last page of our book, folks. We're at the end. Jaurès was this guy. If you're wondering about the gentleman on the front of our book, that is Jean Jaurès. He was many things, but he was a diplomat who was working night and day to try, as an ambassador and a diplomat, to try to stop World War I from happening. And he was assassinated. He was shot in the back at a restaurant right next to La Bourse. The restaurant is still there, although it's not the same establishment, but you can still eat at that restaurant, the location where he was killed. And this was a big deal for the French. And I don't know if you could go so far as to say that without him being assassinated, maybe he does succeed and finds a way to minimize the damage of World War I. You know, maybe if he had had time for his diplomacy, I don't know. That's a sort of debate for another day. And then here, just to finish up, this mentions the mobilization. So they're mobilizing troops from France. And a lot of the Parisians, the young men, had to go to Gare de l'Est. And this is talking about how there were larger and larger crowds at Gare de l'Est as all of these men were being loaded onto the trains and saying goodbye to their families. Really sad stuff. And I wanted to actually bring that home by showing you this painting that exists. And it's right above the arches as you enter in the Gare de l'Est, as you go through the arches onto the actual train tracks themselves. And it shows the departure in 1914 of World War I and all these troops going away. And has always struck me, this painting. I have some close-ups here of the same painting. And it's kind of heartbreaking, because you can see people in the center. There's a guy hugging his little baby to say goodbye. And on the right, of course, is a father saying goodbye to his kids. And boy, it really drives it home. And I think it's lovely that there is a painting in the Gare de l'Est that commemorates that. So I didn't necessarily end on a dark note, but what can I do? I mean, the book ends at 1914, and we all know that it didn't end well. But isn't that extraordinary, this book? Now, I put the title, it's a rather lengthy title, but I put it in the description. So if you want to copy and paste it into Google, even though this is a collector's item, you can still find it for sale. In fact, La Belle Époque is not the only one. In fact, when I figured out that there were other periods, I went out immediately and spent way too much money tracking down the whole set. So maybe we'll do another one of these in the future. But there you go, that's La Belle Époque. And I can hear that I am losing my voice, and my tea is absolutely freezing cold. So maybe it's time to wrap this one up. This is 1 hour and 14 minutes. That's certainly enough of the Belle Époque for one evening. And I want to thank you, Andrea Miles, for your super chat that you just sent. We won't be having a cafe chat tonight because it's already quite late for me here, past 11 p.m. So I am going to go get some rest and try to sleep off this caffeine. But I want to thank you for joining me live if you did, and I want to thank you for watching the replay. And I hope you enjoyed this little bit of history. If we can't travel through Paris right now, then we'll travel through time, is the way that I look at it. So goodbye to all of you live viewers. I appreciate that, and I will catch you for episode number 99. What a lovely number. In no time at all. So thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will catch you on the next episode. Take care. Bye.